What's up, spacecraft collectors? Welcome to a special model review. It's your host Ray. In today's video, I'll be reviewing a 1 to 144th scale replica of the Pathfinder space shuttle featured in the TV show For All Mankind. Pathfinder is a second generation space shuttle concept that launches from a carrier aircraft as opposed to vertical launch from a launch pad, which makes for quite an interesting yet questionable concept. In this video, I'll be comparing the features of this model replica to images of the Pathfinder space shuttle, and I'll be making my observations and criticisms from there. This model is produced by an owner of a store on Etsy, which is called Interplanetary Crafts. This store is actually based in Russia, so ordering from the United States was quite an interesting story, which I will share with you at the end of the video. Let's get this review started. So first, I'd like to talk about presentation. This model is shipped in an intricate system of protection, the first layer being a series of foam sheets that are cut to house the model and the display stand. The model arrives painted and ready to display out of the box. The stand requires very short assembly by screwing the stand onto the base, and the stand is made of a reflective metal material which is very durable, and it holds the spacecraft tightly in place, so the spacecraft is very secure on the stand. The second layer of protection is a cardboard box, which is also surrounded by a lot of tape. It was very tedious to get into the model, but it was for a good reason. I'll start the review at the nose and crew cabin section of the spacecraft. Overall, the shape of the nose is very nicely done. There's a decent amount of detail in the nose, which I will discuss shortly. So far, it looks pretty solid. However, there's a few things that I'd like to point out. The reaction control system holes are actual holes. They're not painted on or anything like other shuttles I've seen. These are physical holes, which is pretty nice. There's also this sort of indentation here on the nose cone, which I'm not sure what that's for, but it's there. It's a nice detail. The black section of the thermal protection system is actually a little bit raised from the surface of the white thermal protection system, which is a nice touch. However, there's a lot of issues with the paint on the black section of the thermal protection system, since there's a few scuff marks between where the black and the white sections come into contact. Something I noticed on the nose is that the dark gray reinforced carbon-carbon nose cone is not painted on the model. I expected this because on the images of the listing that wasn't present, but given that this model was so expensive, it would have been nice to see a detail like that. Moving to the access hatch, this access hatch is nice. It looks nicely done, but it's not accurate. There's a missing section of black thermal protection system that is supposed to surround the window here. However, that's not present, and the window is not painted gray or blue or anything to indicate that it's a window. On the right side of the nose section of the spacecraft, there is not very much to see. There's just the Pathfinder logo and then this giant blank white space. On the Pathfinder in the show, there is a large section of black thermal protection system that's on this side, and this section of black thermal protection system was also featured on the first generation space shuttles. However, on the left side, that section is missing. It would go up to the access hatch. It's missing on the show on the left side, but it's present on the right side, and on the model, it's missing. Moving to the top of the crew compartment, here we can see the cockpit windows and the docking windows. The cockpit windows are made nicely, the shapes look good. However, unfortunately, the frames aren't painted black like they were on the real Pathfinder in the show, which these are very small, but it still would have been nice to see at least some effort being put into painting them. The cockpit window paint isn't done very well. It's a very spotty gray color because it looks like the paint wasn't applied correctly, and I expected them to be a solid dark gray because that's how they were in the images of the listing on the website. Unfortunately, they're not this way on this model. It's something I can fix, but given how expensive the model was, it would have been nice to see at least that being done correctly. Moving to the top of the crew cabin, here we have two lumps that appear behind the cockpit, and this seemed like an inaccuracy at first, but these two lumps, which appear to be sensors of some sort, are actually present on the Pathfinder in the show. This antenna is also present, however it's nowhere near as thick as it is on the model. It's also very small, so I can't complain too much about it. And the docking windows aren't done very well either. There's no frames surrounding them, they're just indentations in the top of the fuselage. Moving to the main part of the aircraft, I'll continue talking about the fuselage and the payload bay. The payload bay doors are very clearly depicted by lines, if you will. They're just distinct lines that outline the payload bay doors. However, these lines are not as distinct on the Pathfinder in the show. As much as I appreciate the outlining of the payload bay doors, it's really not as accurate. And this line here in the center is also not present on the Pathfinder in the show. However, it is present on a blueprint that was seen in the show. I'm not really sure whether or not that should be included there. If it wasn't included, it would look very bland, but it would be a bit more accurate. Moving to the sides of the fuselage, the sides look pretty good. I have no complaints about the shape or anything. The logos here, they're printed nicely, however, both of them are inaccurate in some way or another. The United States title here should be moved more towards the crew cabin, like on the Pathfinder in the show. And this NASA logo here, while it's in the right place and it's the right color, or it might be a little bit too dark, it's not the right NASA logo. This NASA logo is the logo that's used in our world. This is an official NASA logo. However, in For All Mankind, the NASA worm logo is changed to a slightly different one for unknown reasons, but this is not the correct NASA logo that should be used. Moving towards the engine compartment, there's a few interesting things on the fuselage that I noticed. Most notably, these creases here. There's distinct lines where I guess the material wasn't formed correctly and it ended up leading to the model looking like this. They're very easy to notice from a distance, and I really am not a fan of them, but I can't do very much about them either. So there are inconsistencies here and there with the surface of the model. On the right side, they aren't really as present except for this one section here, but these lines aren't as noticeable as on the left side. Moving on to the wing, the wings of the spacecraft are made very nicely. The shape is accurate, and most of the features on them are accurate except for a few things. First, this chine of black thermal protection system is extended way too far out onto the wing. On the Pathfinder in the show, this chine is nowhere near as far out onto the wing as here on the model. Like the nose, there's also a missing section of gray reinforced carbon-carbon panels on the leading edge of both wings, and I believe I do see reinforced carbon-carbon on the leading edges of the stabilizers in the show. However, this isn't present on the model either, so there's no details for any RCC panels on the model, unfortunately. Speaking of the stabilizers, though, the stabilizers look pretty solid. The shape is good. Instead of the rudder/air brake things here growing a little bit thicker as they went down the stabilizer, they stayed very thin throughout. Something else I also noticed is that this section of black TPS is supposed to extend a little bit further down on the stabilizer. However, it stays up towards where the top speed brake or rudder ends. Here are the control surfaces and the rear section of the wing. Back here we can see both elevons, which look okay. There's a few stains on this one here, and these have been very tough to clean, and throughout the model there have been a lot of stains. A lot of them have been easy to clean, but there's a lot of them also like this which are very hard to clean. There's also this line section which is accurate, and there's a distinct border right here between the line section and the rest of the flat wing, which is not present on the Pathfinder in the show. There's also this weird paint application issue that happened on the right side of the spacecraft. Not sure why that is, but I guess there was an issue with the paint. And back here there was more paint application issues. The logos, like I said, the NASA logo is incorrect, but it still looks pretty good, and the Pathfinder logo is actually correct in the correct font, the correct size. Looks very good. And moving to the air-breathing engines, or under the air-breathing engines, if you will, there's this weird crease that I see right under there, and I'm not sure why that's there. It's not present on the Pathfinder in the show, so that's a small inaccuracy that I noticed. The left wing looks a lot better, however, it's not without issues. There's a few stains on the section of fuselage under the air-breathing engine, and two of the lines on the line section just ahead of the elevons are not painted either for some reason. And that crease that I mentioned under the air-breathing engine is still there on the left side as well. I'm going to start discussing the engine compartment of the spacecraft. On the top of the engine section we have this very large aerodynamic antenna, I guess. This is done very nicely. It's very sturdy as well, so if you're worried about breaking it, it won't break. It's very sturdy. On the top of the spacecraft we have two, I guess, air-breathing engines. The community who watches For All Mankind have come to many conclusions about what these are, but the most popular one I've seen is that these are air-breathing engines, so I'm going to go along with that. The intakes of the air-breathing engines look rather questionable, honestly. There's a lot of creases on the leading edges of the intakes here, but the shape is overall accurate, and while there's a few paint issues on this one, they still look pretty good. Here's the one on the right side. The one on the right side looks a little bit better. Here are the exhausts of the air-breathing engines. These look fantastic, however, they are not without issues. The holes for the exhausts themselves, the exhaust nozzles here for the air breathing engines are too wide. They should be a little, ever so slightly smaller. It's a very small detail that I noticed, but it's still something I feel the need to point out. But aside from that, they're very nicely detailed. The coloring is very nice, especially with the dark metallic gray. It looks pretty good overall. Above the rocket engines, we have some sort of compartment that contains holes for RCS thrusters. On the Pathfinder in the show, these holes are not present. However, this is rather accurate for the spacecraft, as it wouldn't be able to maneuver without them. So it's a feature that the owner of the Interplanetary Craft store added, which I personally think is somewhat helpful, but it's not realistic in terms of replicating the Pathfinder shuttle exactly. The side of this RCS section, if you will, is also painted dark gray from the looks of it. This might be the effects of a shadow though, not 100% sure, but it looks very dark gray instead of white like here on the model. So I'm not sure if that's an inaccuracy or not, so I won't really draw any conclusions on that. Now for the part we've all been waiting for, the propulsion systems. We have two very small orbital maneuvering rockets which look pretty good. The nozzles are nice. No complaints on those. I'll show you the other side. And in between those, we have the main Nerva engine. This is a nuclear engine. It looks pretty accurate, and it matches the one in the show, so that's very nice. It looks pretty good, and I have no complaints about that. There's two pipes going into the bottom of the nuclear engine, and in the show, there is a third pipe that goes from the top right of the engine nozzle into the spacecraft. I'm going to assume that provides fuel. I'm not 100% sure, but this is missing on the model. Behind the engines, there's a section of panel that I've noticed that has a lot of stains from the glue application. I expected it since these are very small parts, but it is kind of irritating to see that. Something I also noticed was that the engine appeared to be very far back into the spacecraft. However, I realized this was a result of the RCS section above the engine being extended too far, so it is too long on the backside of the spacecraft. Something else I also noticed was this little panel right under the main engine. It was very small and it didn't look right to me, and my guesses were correct because this panel here is not depicted correctly. Instead, it should be painted white on the top and it's painted black, and it should be more rounded, and it should come into contact with the inboard elevons. This is the best view I can give you of the bottom of the spacecraft. The bottom of the spacecraft doesn't really have anything to show as expected. It's just a satin finish of black paint, which looks pretty good. It's applied pretty well, and it seems pretty durable, so I won't complain about that, and it's pretty good overall. Well, that concludes the review, and wow, we went way over the time I anticipated. I'll finish this video up quickly. Well, time for my personal opinion. This model is incredibly expensive, and it has a lot of things that I didn't really like, a lot of issues, for lack of a better term. However, I need to point out that this is the only replica of the Pathfinder space shuttle that exists right now in 1/144th scale. I mean, it's pretty good. It's still pretty good regardless. So, do I recommend it? Yes. Proceed at your own risk. It does have its drawbacks, but it's the only one available, so if you were to get a Pathfinder replica, so far, this is the only one you can get, so if you want it, get it. It's pretty nice regardless. And another thing that I'd like to point out, as I said earlier, the store where I bought this from is based in Russia, and that led to a very long shipping time due to both geographical location and the current situation regarding Russia and Ukraine. So it was very hard to get the model over here in less than 2 months, but it did arrive in about 2 months. I ordered this in October of 2022, and it arrived in late December of 2022, and it arrived perfectly. So while the store is located in Russia, you can order from the United States. Just expect a very long shipping time due to geographical location and the fact that the store owner hand makes these models per the order that they receive, so they don't keep like a backstock of any of them. They hand make every one of them from scratch, which is pretty impressive. Well, that concludes the video. Thank you so much for watching if you stayed till the end. That's all I really have to say. I don't have any other planned spacecraft reviews, but my model aircraft collecting habits are not going down anytime soon, so stay tuned for more model aircraft reviews and potentially model siren reviews. Like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Take good care of yourself. See you later.